So this is a guide into how to answer question 2 of your Cold War paper. It's for 8 marks, and this time you'll be asked to write a narrative account analysing the key events of, and then you'll be given an event from the Cold War. Crucially, in this question, remember question 1, you'll be describing or explaining just the consequences of the event. In this question, you're asked to write a narrative account of an event. So now you are going to talk about that specific event. So for example, in this example I've got here, it says write a narrative account analysing the key events of the Berlin crisis. So I'm going to talk about the Berlin crisis, not just what happened after. I'm going to talk about the event itself this time. So it's different to question 1. Question 1, you talk about the consequences of it. This one, you're going to give the narrative account and then sort of briefly say about the consequences at the end. So, in essence, this is simply tell us the story of whatever event you've got. The crucial thing you want to be doing here is putting the events in time order, in chronological order, and making sure the events link on from one to the other. So, for example, you're going to give an opening statement with details of what followed next. So you're going to start with the question focus, happened when. So in the example here, the Berlin crisis happened when, and you're going to start with that. Support your opening statement with details of what followed next. So this was because, so Berlin crisis started when, and this was because. Why did it start? This was because what? Explain how this or these events links to or cause the next event. So then you should talk about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. In terms of, you want to develop on words with phrases like therefore, thus, hence, because of this, as a consequence of this led to, as a result of this, in order to, and combined with. Crucially, you want to be link and develop to the next event, linking each point to the next thing. Okay, so tell the story of, for example, this one, how the Berlin crisis unfolded. How do we go from the Berlin Ultimatum to the construction of the Berlin Wall? Okay, now 2 things. So on this question, you've been given bullet points to help you with your answer. Often the bullet points will be sort of your start and end of your answer, and you're filling in the events in between it, but just be careful in case they are not. Okay, so pay attention to your bullet points that you've been given, and I'm going to start mine by saying question focus happened when. So in this one is the Berlin crisis happened when. The Berlin crisis happened when the Soviet Union was upset, when thousands of people were moving from East Berlin to West Berlin to escape oppressive communism. And I'm going to explain that more. So I'm going to start by saying this was because. This was because the refugee problem caused such concern in Moscow that Khrushchev issued an ultimatum. So that's addressing that bullet point there, isn't it? Demanding that the US acknowledge East Germany as an independent state. So this is why I'm just explaining the Berlin Ultimatum. By making Berlin a free city and having the USA and USSR withdraw their presence there, Khrushchev hoped it would make escaping to the West much harder for people without US support, as Berlin was deep in Soviet-influenced East Germany, and so getting to the West would be blocked. And now, I'm just going to talk about what happened next. So Khrushchev introduces or states the Berlin Ultimatum. What happens next? Therefore, a 6-month deadline was given to the US to comply, or else the Soviets would hand control of the land routes to Berlin to East Germany. The US was furious and were unwilling to give up West Berlin, an outpost of democracy behind communist lines. However, it still desired a solution short of war. So now we'll talk about what happens next. Because of this, what's the next thing that happens? This resulted in, notice how my events are linking from one to the next. This happened, which caused this, then this caused this. So this resulted in a series of talks taking place to resolve the crisis. The summit meetings following Khrushchev's ultimatum were largely unproductive. No agreements were reached, but Eisenhower and Khrushchev were getting along. This soon soured, however, when just prior to the Paris summit in 1960, a US spy plane was shot down by the Soviets. Eisenhower refused to apologize, and talks broke down. And then I'm just going to describe what happened next. So it'll be very simple. I'm just going to say, then new President Kennedy met with Khrushchev in Vienna in 1961. Khrushchev thought he could bully the young, inexperienced president and reinstated or reissued the Berlin Ultimatum. JFK stood firm, however, giving the impression that he would be prepared to go to war over the defense of democratic West Berlin. In the midst of this tension, with Khrushchev being urged all the time to close the borders to prevent even greater numbers leaving for the West, East German troops erected a barbed wire fence throughout Berlin that eventually was replaced with a permanent concrete wall. Talks were over, and Berlin was to become physically divided for decades. Those caught trying to escape over no man's land between the walls were shot. And that therefore has taken me from the Berlin Ultimatum to the construction of the Berlin Wall. That's taken me all the way through the Berlin Crisis. I'm then just going to go into a little bit more detail where I'm going to say, because of this, in a bold propaganda exercise, JFK himself travelled to Berlin to give a speech in 1963 to reinforce US support for West Berlin and to demonstrate to the Soviet Union and the rest of the onlooking world USA's defiance and resolve to defend democracy and oppose communist expansion. Just be careful there, because my section there about JFK, the question does say 58 to 61. I've gone just outside of that, but it is still relevant to the Berlin crisis.